Hey guys, today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Over the past year, I've really gotten back into listening to more music, and I've been listening to more artists and albums than I ever have before. There have been many albums that have meant a lot to me, but there is one that has stood out more than anything I've ever heard before. This album being Quadeca's I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. If you've never listened to this album before, I would highly recommend you go watch the full album movie before watching this video. But if you don't want to do that, I hope this video convinces you to go check it out. Ben Lasky, aka Quadeca, released I Didn't Mean to Haunt You on November 11th, 2022, accompanied by a nearly 1 hour album movie on his YouTube channel. Also, quick trigger warning, there are mentions of suicide and death in this video. With all that out of the way, I present to you my interpretation of Quadeca's masterpiece, I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. According to Quadeca, the story picks up right after the end of his second studio album, From Me to You, which also seems to be a sequel to his first ever studio album, Voice Memos. To sum up the two albums, Voice Memos follows Quadeca's successes and struggles with fame as a high school student, ending with him presumably in a happy relationship with a girl that helps him balance the struggles of being a major media influence on the rise. From Me to You picks up after Quadeca graduates high school and follows the rocky transition into college, as his girlfriend chooses to attend a different university than him. The story revolves around the metaphor of life and its challenges being a mountain climb, as the most popular and in my opinion best track from the album is titled Sisyphus, a reference to the figure in Greek mythology who was punished by pushing a boulder up a mountain just for it to roll back down as soon as he got to the top for the rest of eternity. This is very similar to the struggles he experiences throughout the album, which in my interpretation ends with the two of them splitting up. He seems to understand that the decision was one that had to have been made, as in the second to last song, Summit Part 1, he acknowledges everyone has their own mountains to climb.
I know you got mountains of your own. I gotta help you climb, and I feel guilty. I spent all this time trying to work through mine.
So it seems that he understands the decision. However, in the world of I Didn't Mean to Haunt You, it took a toll on him, one that pushed him over the edge. The album begins with the cinematic intro of Sorry for Dying, symbolizing the gravity of the decision he just made, that decision being to take his own life. In the lone verse, we hear his first thoughts after making that fatal choice.
Come to think about it, it's all in my head. Fuel tank blink, it's been running in a red.
He compares himself to a blinking red fuel tank and states that he had God stuck in between his hands as he used his own power to take his life away. He begins to wander throughout his home. He doesn't quite regret the decision as of now, but he instantly recognizes the lonely feeling of just being a spirit that no one can see. He attempts to comfort his grieving family, but is worried that his presence as a ghost, if noticed, will do nothing but scare and haunt those that care about him, tying back to the title, I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. The music grows more intense as he keeps repeating the word I, which I take as him beginning to replay the decision in his head and wondering if it was even really worth it. The song begins with Quadeca reciting the common phrase, knock knock who's there, followed by some common comedy tropes. This is sort of his way of asking if there's anyone out there that can see him or even feel his presence. He continues to stalk his family members in his home, yet they can't see him. To him it's funny that people are saying his death was too soon, and that he had so many things left to do.
so many things left to do. And it's funny you said it's too soon.
It hits him that maybe people didn't care about what he thought was an obvious mental decline. Quadeca calls himself the punchline of a joke, as if his mental struggle in the real world wasn't enough. As soon as he finally makes it out, he's once again left lonely and depressed.
All I could hear were the crickets. Funny the joke is on. I tried hard not to miss it. Everything I could.
He acknowledges everything he couldn't be in the real world, yet he doesn't seem to be anything in the afterlife either. In Don't Mind Me, Quadeca begins to witness the full after effects of his death. The words "don't mind me" could be him saying that his life was so meaningless it's not worth being sad over. Yet throughout the entire song we witness the effects it has on his family, and more specifically his mother.
Open up boxes, looking for closure. Point to the sky, phone, you know I'm so much closer.
She's opening boxes, looking for closure, making a souvenir version of him. She points to the sky as if he's in heaven. He wants to comfort her and tell her that he's so much closer, but in its ghostly form there's nothing he can do. He watches as everyone is grieving in their own way over his death, longing for his presence, the presence of someone that they perceive to be long gone and far away. Yet he's not. He's standing right there. Picking Up Hands is our first look into Quadeca reflecting back to when he was alive. It's the start of him showing that regret, that he shouldn't have done what he did. For the previous 3 songs, he was wallowing in the aftermath, but now he truly regrets the past. He walks through his room, one that doesn't seem to have been touched since his death. He attempts to interact with his dog, but it runs away, reflecting the popular belief that dogs can see the supernatural.
Tried to call, but the dog runs away from me now.
I think this is one of the most powerful parts in the album movie, as we see Quadeca playing fetch with a stray dog that actually wandered up to him during the filming of the movie. This is a gut punch, as the only being that can have somewhat of an interaction with him is scared. Once again tying back to the title, I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. The song ends with a statement from Quadeca. His acknowledgement that so far the afterlife is not what he was expecting and not what he had hoped for.
Unspoken agreements that make perfect sense until you say them out loud.
Born Yesterday was the first single released by Quadeca and one of the most powerful songs on the entire record. The song begins with Quadeca repeating the lines, "I wasn't born yesterday, I think you're goddamn lying," followed by a sample of the Beatles song For No One. This sample echoes how he longs for his mother. The line, "She no longer needs you," is a heartbreaking one to listen to. The emphasis on the word "you" sticks out, as it reflects that maybe his mom is beginning to move on from his death. Yet Quadeca doesn't believe it. He still thinks that she's hurting. Saying that he wasn't born yesterday tells us that he's smart enough to know that his mom isn't moving on. She's still hurting. The final line of the first verse is him outright admitting that his suicide was a mistake. Yet he still made the decision. And now I'm here. He notes that his death has affected many, despite earlier in the album his idea that his life wasn't worth all the sadness felt now. His mother goes on to wonder, maybe it all happened for a reason, in which Quadeca once again responds that he thinks she's lying. It didn't need to happen. It shouldn't have happened, yet it did. It happened for no reason. The bridge takes us into one of the most emotional parts of the entire album as he lets out all the regret he has.
I'll be free if I just save the day. Yeah, with you right now. And that day flash should stay delayed. 'Cause the only thing I want is out. And it's all those little things.
This track serves as an interlude for the entire album. It only has a few lines that highlight how his mother is still grieving and that he is still suffering in his afterlife. I think the most powerful part of this track is in the album movie, where we see tunnel vision effect put around countless childhood memories of Quadeca, as if his life is flashing before his eyes. At this point in the story, Quadeca is desperate for his presence to be known, yet he still doesn't want to hurt or haunt his family. In house settling, he puts that all aside and tries his best to get them to notice him. He attempts to make noises in the house, creaking the floors as we hear at the beginning of the song. He lowers the heat in the house, yet his family just brushes it off as the house settling. He feels like they are ignoring him, yet he says he can't go anywhere else. It's his home. He feels like he needs to be there. That's when he decides to go to the extreme and begins to leak carbon monoxide into the house. He does this in an attempt to get them to either hallucinate and see him, or even die and join him in the afterlife. Danny Brown is featured on this track, rapping from the perspective of carbon monoxide, describing how it weakens you, brings you to tears, and eventually kills you. In my interpretation, Quadeca doesn't actually end up killing his family, as at the beginning of the song he begs his mom not to breathe in the air, and throughout the rest of the album there is no reference to anyone else being there with him. Quadeca leaves the song overcome with guilt that he almost took the life of his family, and sadness that he still couldn't get them to acknowledge his existence. Knots is, in my point of view, the ghost of Quadeca having a panic attack or some sort of psychotic breakdown after the events of house settling. The electronic melodies almost feel like the regret and guilt is raining down on him. He constantly repeats that his body is covered in knots and that he's an open book in a closed casket. This could be a reference to despite how being dead, he still very much experienced feelings, and those feelings are the knots that cover his sore, ghostly body. He mentions that every time someone tries to talk about him, they just stop or stutter, as if to put him at the back of their minds and ignore him, as if focusing on his death could bring back those grieving emotions. In the second verse he says, "I don't fade to black, I cut to static," which is a reference to the final song of this album, but also could be a reference to how instant his death was for many. It came out of nowhere. A fade to black is something that has a clear start and end. You could have noticed that something was going to happen, yet no one did. It happened instantly, like a cut to static. The song ends with, similarly to Picking Up Hands, another statement. This one ties to the next track. It's confirmed by Quadeca that this hints at the next track being a flashback to before he took his actions.
Took out that dome too soon. It was like waiting in the red room. Going in front of the projector. I watched it all again.
flashback to what he thought his actions would lead him to, living in a fantasy world. This is easily my favorite song on the album and one of the most beautiful songs I've heard in my entire life. It begins with soft piano and Quadeca singing without any effects or distortion on his voice, something that bolsters the idea that this is his human form speaking, before he takes his own life, before he transitions into the afterlife. He touches on how he currently has nothing to do but count sheep. His life feels meaningless, and so that's what leads him to want to end his life. It's ironic though, as once he does make that decision, he's once again left in that void where he doesn't have anything to do. He tried to contact his family, but it didn't work. We see his past self long for a place that he hopes he will end up in if he makes a decision to take his own life.
So I drove mountains away to a place that ain't real, to a place that ain't real.
Here he references that he drove mountains away, which could be a reference back to From Me to You. It could show how there were many mountains that Quadeca would have to face if he chose to live his full life, yet he decided to skip all of them, instead cutting his life short in an attempt to gain access to the reward, his fantasy world. The thought is comforting to him, as he compares it to other comforting places in his life.
It's your mom's bakery in Maine. It's that cabin in Sweden.
We see him grow ever closer to making that fatal decision. The music stops, and we hear a ringing as it transitions into what I like to call the climax of the entire album.
That's a fantasy world. That's the one that I've chosen.
He wants to go to his fantasy world, where he will have no responsibility but to relax in what he believes will be the perfect afterlife. He ends the song by stating he goes, but not in a rush, suggesting that maybe he wants to live out his full life, yet we all know that at this point it's too late for him to go back on that decision. This is when we see Quadeca begin to take responsibility for his actions, admitting that he didn't think before taking his own life, and that he can't hide from the fact that he attempted to kill his family with carbon monoxide. In the chorus, he mentions how he thinks all of his motives to take his own life were all in his head, but he already made the decision, so there's nothing he can do about it. He states that he was always afraid of nothing, yet that's the situation he is now facing. He can't go back on the decision, so instead of continuing to fear it, he needs to attempt to overcome it, or else he will never be able to come to terms with the decision he made.
Been afraid of nothing for so long. That's why I'm stuck with it. But nothing is gonna change until I change what nothing is in it.
The song concludes with the Sunday service choir repeating the phrase, "Those words don't do you justice," which could be touching on the fact that no matter what Quadeca says, it will never express how truly regretful he feels about the decision that he can't reverse.
Those words don't do you justice. Those words don't do you justice.
In the final song, Quadeca reflects on everything that has happened to this point and eventually shows him phasing into static. The title of the song refers to the gap in Saturn's rings, an empty space in between them, a reference to Quadeca being stuck in between life and the afterlife. He recounts his memory of his mother witnessing his dead body, her reaction and the reaction of others as well, and also how he wants everyone to remember him, but not to the point where it causes them pain. After all this reflection, we hear different sounds that could symbolize his struggle as he finally faces the fears of nothingness, which is followed by 3 minutes of static that continues to grow as he finally fades into nothingness. Overall, this album is easily my favorite that's ever been made. The music and storytelling that goes into it is unlike anything I've ever heard before. One more thing that I do want to touch on that does add a lot to the album are the visuals. All of the art for the album was painted by Paige Prier, a self-called haunted paintress. She definitely lives up to that name, as the art for this album is absolutely gorgeous yet haunting. There are 4 main pieces for the album: the main cover, the track list, and the 2 covers for both of the singles. Each piece perfectly complements what it is trying to portray. The first thing I ever saw about this album was the album cover. After listening to the album, I feel like it perfectly encapsulates everything about it. The house in the background, the jagged limbs of the trees, the 3 figures on the right side, and the expressions on their faces. All of it is absolutely haunting. Overall, the album art is the cherry on top that really pushes this album ahead of anything else I've ever listened to. Finally, I would like to touch on the album movie and single music videos that I've touched on throughout the duration of this video. My first time listening to this album was through watching the album movie, and all I'm going to say is that this is a must-watch. Quadeca is pictured in many different ways throughout the movie, wearing a white ski mask and a black coat, wearing a hood over his head, and wearing a black suit with his bright bleached hair contrasting the entire outfit. Each one gives off its own vibe that is hard to even put into words. The entire movie is just riddled with details, so many that you can easily find a handful in every single rewatch. I would like to thank Quadeca for making this absolute masterpiece of an album, and I want to thank you all for watching. There were a lot of small details I didn't cover in this video, so I'd really recommend going over to the Genius page for each song. Almost every line has an annotation, which is where I got a lot of the details for this video. And there are so many more interesting details that I really think you guys will all enjoy. I would also recommend watching the Anthony Fantano interview with Quadeca about this album, as it goes into more detail on the actual production, and specific details from the man who actually created it. Whether this is your first time coming across this album, or you're already a fan of Quadeca's work, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of the album. He has lots of new music coming out. At the time of writing the script, he has released the first pack of his Scrapyard series, and the next one is just a few days away, which I'm really excited for. So check the link in the description to keep up with his new work. Thanks again for watching, and please go listen to this album. Have a good rest of your day.